Hi. I know, we're going live twice in one day. What a big deal. I am, to set the scene for you, sat outside in my family garden. So if you hear like extra noises that don't sound like they should be coming from inside a house, it's because we're outside the house. If you're tuning in and you're like, oh look, alive with Dom, how cool. Thank you so much for doing so. I want to talk today about teaching with brain trauma. So that is your sort of trigger warning if brain trauma is something that you are that you are not super emotionally, mentally ready to have a bit of a chit chat about. No offense taken. Please feel free. And the reason why I feel inspired to sit down today, and especially in my garden, is because of the class I just taught. And if you tune in, I don't know what I'm going to call it yet, so I'll maybe like put that in the notes for this live so you can go check out what I'm talking about. Dogs. The reason why I wanted to do that right now is it's something I've been thinking about for a while. And especially as my base of teaching has been expanding, there's a lot of new friends who don't really know my story and don't really know my lens of teaching. And then on top of that, in class that just happened, that I'll put the name in below, I had a moment where I completely forgot, like literally forgot everything. And I have been a teacher I've been teaching full-time for 5 years. Most of that has been teaching Pilates. Yoga is kind of new to the repertoire, but my personal yoga practice has been a lot longer. My personal yoga practice has been probably like somewhere around, I want to say like 16 years now, maybe. And I know that in teaching that sometimes we have brain fart moments. And if you are lucky enough to be a teacher who feels pretty strong and confident in what you're teaching, we know that we can laugh it off and it's no big deal. Sometimes that's not how we feel. Sometimes we feel like it's a reflection of our skills, and that's also not true. And it's interesting as well, having a background in teaching many different types of movements, how this like brain blanking plays a role in how I feel about what I have to offer. And anyway, as I scatter all over the place because of brain trauma. So let me start from the beginning. For anyone who doesn't already know me, I am Dom. Hi. And I teach yoga, Pilates, barre, and restorative yoga. And I'm a huge advocate for being an advocate for yourself, feeling like you get a say in what your body's journey is, and whether that is related to something that's to do with your mental health, your physical health, your emotional health, your spiritual health. At the end of the day, like, your journey is for you. And I believe as a movement facilitator, I don't even really like using the word teacher, but I feel like it's kind of simple, like everyone kind of gets what I mean when I say that, but I don't actually feel like teacher is the right word. I really feel like my role in the journey that every person in the classroom is on is to provide space and opportunity for anybody who's in the room to make an informed choice. And the information can be what I'm giving. The information could be what I'm asking or inviting you to explore, all of those things, right? That's what I really feel like my role is. And the reason I feel that way is because I was in a major accident. Here we go with the trigger warning business. I was on a balcony and the railing collapsed. I was about 2 stories up. I was on the 2nd floor. And the railing collapsed and I fell. And I had quite the onslaught of injury, and I won't go into it all now. I have a podcast, or maybe you're listening to this on the podcast, and the first episode, it's called Embodied Alchemy Pod, goes into all of it. But my body was pretty banged up, and I went from being a full-time athlete to then being in full-time recovery. And it's really quite astonishing, even within the healthcare system, how you can be treated as a young woman, as an athlete, as just a person, basically, and on both ends, like being treated really, really well. And then there were times where I was spoken to in a way where my journey felt very disempowered. Like, even though I knew what was happening in my body, that information was not being received well. It was sort of like brushed off, even though I knew what was going on internally. And so that experience, as I stepped into more of a leadership role in movement, was something that I really wanted to make sure never happened in my class. My ethos is that I want to make sure anyone who comes to class knows that if they want to make a decision that's outside of anything I've suggested, then that is freaking amazing. That's what we're here to do. We're here to explore and move and play. And that means that as you're listening to your body, maybe there are decisions that you want to make that haven't been said, and you have every 1,000,000,000% right to make that decision. And so that's where my teaching ethos comes from and my platform comes from. Now, something that sort of came up as I stepped into the role of teaching is that one of my major experiences that I continue to live with that I didn't have to worry about before was brain trauma. So, I mean, if you're looking, you can see like a little bit of my scar, but I had a pretty intense head injury. My forehead, trigger warning, this might be big gross, my forehead was split open from pretty much like right at the top of my forehead all the way down to just above my nose, kind of like eyebrow territory. And it was split all the way open to the bone, which is disgusting, which was gross. It meant a lot of blood, and that's also, any injury to your head is dangerous, but that is a very dangerous thing to have happened. So regardless of everything else that happened, I was told that even if I had just been taken to the trauma unit with the head injury that I had, that would have been enough to like have me knocked out and put under for hours to make sure I was okay, never mind the onslaught of other stuff, which is a pretty bold statement, I think. And it's something that I still process, is a lot of information that I didn't have the comfort to process before. So it's a pretty big thing for someone to say that even though you have all of this other physical stuff, just this one head trauma alone is enough to warrant being kept under for a little while. So my head was stitched back together. And the nurse, if there's any chance she ever finds me, did a beautiful job. Whoever stitched me back up, that could have been quite the, not Harry Potter. I would have actually been like very down for a Harry Potter scar, but it could have been kind of gruesome, and it wasn't. And so then I started this journey of being physically presented to the world where I was immediately getting judged for how I looked, which I think happens to us all anyway. But I was being judged for this thing on my head, and I felt like my brain on the inside already felt like a mashed potato, and then having something on the outside that was drawing attention to the fact that I felt like a mashed potato with my brain was a kind of uncomfortable experience. And oftentimes, and it still happens every now and then, where someone would look at me and they would be like, oh my gosh, what happened to you? And oh my gosh, what happened to your brain? And when your brain already feels like a mashed potato, it doesn't really have the patience to then like eloquently explain to people what has happened. And so as I was working through what it means to have brain trauma, I was sort of written off as, and this isn't just me, this is pretty much everybody. Within Ontario, I want to say within Canada, potentially globally, there is the, I don't know what word to use, stigma or idea or like written down that wherever you are after 6 months is where you're going to be forever. So whatever progress you make within 6 months that's it. And I'm sure there is truth to that. I am not a scientist, but if that is the case, then I feel like, and I'm going to get on a pedestal for a moment, if that is what we are saying and what we are committed to is that after 6 months, after a brain trauma, whatever you've experienced, that's it forever. Does it not then make sense that we would take those 6 months that we have before that sort of like finish line or deadline or whatever that's been given to make sure we have as much progress made as possible? And the reality is that in our healthcare system and in most healthcare systems, there is no program in place, really. It's just sort of like you crack on with things, carry on with life, and that's it. And the brain is such a complicated and like unbelievably intelligent ecosystem of information that it is going to start to create different neural pathways. And those neural pathways might end up being really successful. Those neural pathways might end up being a little more complicated, but it's going to start to rewire things. And so this kind of trap that we fall into is that sometimes it can look like things are okay. Like, for example, for me, one of the things that I really struggled with was, memory, but speaking. Like, there were times when especially in those first couple months, that I would be speaking and I would think that I was saying one word and a different word would be coming out of my mouth. And I used to practice with my sister saying the days of the week, thinking that I was saying the days of the week, and she would go, what do you think you're saying? Because the words that are coming out of your mouth are not the days of the week. Or I would miss days of the week, and same with the months, like really basic things. And so there's no real system in place, and then you're sort of chugging along, and so then that sort of gets this place where it's like, all right, well, you're at 6 months, and your memory's not that great, and there's also a whole world of like emotional stuff that comes out, and like behavioral stuff that comes out with brain trauma, especially like with frontal lobes. Well, I shouldn't say especially, I'm sure it's with everybody. With frontal lobe, your frontal lobe cortex is helping to control, I'm like, really should have looked this up before I just sat down, but from what I understand in my experience and what I've learned, your frontal cortex is where you're processing information and behaviors and reactions and emotions and that kind of stuff. So anybody who has experienced brain trauma often then starts to find themselves in this place of they can be very like emotionally triggered. So for literally no reason, be very angry. And I would find that with myself too, that I would be totally fine, and the moment I was overstimulated by sound or by visuals, by light, I would just like freak out. And that's also not like a very comfortable place to be in. So I was very fortunate that I had an amazing team of people that helped just sort of like throw resources at me, and I also had the financial resources to try all of these things. So I was like incredibly fortunate that way. And so one of the resources that was thrown at me was something called it's a brain injury clinic, and I would just call it brain rehab. And I would go once a week for about a year. They're pretty extensive. And I would go, and we would sort of start to very gently nudge the brain and nudge the triggers to start to recreate pathways that were healthier, that wouldn't feel like so emotionally exhausting, that would help with memory, that would help with not feeling so overloaded, because your brain is processing everything that happens, things that we don't even have the capacity to like understand, which is hilarious that we have this thing that like runs all the systems, but then also like we can't understand all the systems. Unbelievable. And so I was really fortunate to get to go through this brain rehab program. And so as I was going through this program and I start to be able to be more functional, I get to a place in my early 20s, probably about 22 at the time. Yeah, I would have been about 22, where I was like, how do I continue moving forward in life? As a 22-year-old who now has had all of this stuff happen, had a brain trauma, what does my work life look like? My memory's not great. I, for physical reasons, can't be on my feet all day. I also can't be sitting all day. I also can't work full time. So what does my life look like? And at the time, I had been taking Pilates as part of my physical rehab. And fortunately, and with like more gratitude than I can ever express, was sort of pulled aside and asked if I'd be interested in teaching. To which point I was like, I don't know if that's even something that I can do, but I would really like to try. And what I found was, being a dancer my whole life, seeing movement in the body and patterns in the body was really, really organic, really like just built into my system. And that was really great because I didn't have to worry about memorizing anything. I didn't have to worry about could my brain remember things, because it was just innate in my body. And I think that when you start moving into teaching, that's something that gets really kind of nerve-wracking, is that it's like, how am I going to remember all of this information? And I feel very privileged on my end as a teacher to know that the body's going to continually give you information. And so whether you know exactly what that information is down to like the bones and the ligaments and the joints and the musculature, or you can see the pattern and understand what it means, like those are two very appropriate and awesome ways to get into teaching. And so even though my memory's not amazing, and I was told that with brain trauma there's a lot I wouldn't be able to do, teaching was something that I felt like made sense. And I loved it, and it gave me purpose, and I like to feel like I had a great influence on teachers on students and practitioners and whatnot as well. And I was in a space that was very fostering of health and love and continuing education and making mistakes. And I recognize that my story might feel the same to someone who's new to teaching and hasn't had brain trauma. We all make mistakes. And I want to be really clear about that as well, that like the mistake making process is part of teaching. The brain fart process, where I really wish I had another name for that, like brain blanking, but brain farting makes me kind of giggle and I want to keep it light. So like all of those things are normal to teaching. And I think it's important, sorry, excuse me. I think it's important to normalize that, because especially with online, if you're filming and you make a mistake, you can just like cut the camera, start again, catch it up, and you're good to go. And I, after teaching this class today, felt like, you know what? I had a huge brain fart moment. That was such a mess. I don't want to post this as part of my professionalism. And I felt like that because I felt like what I was presenting wasn't good enough. That because I had a moment where I felt very lost and then sort of flustered, even though teaching by myself, can't see anybody else, there's no screen happening. If you're teaching live, then like sometimes people will give you those little bits of things because they're ready to go, and it's like, oh, you know what, I was maybe gonna forget that thing, but that person started it and I know that's right. Like we all experience that as teachers, right? So it's all completely valid. But I felt this, the first thing I think of whenever I make a mistake is it's brain trauma. If I didn't have brain trauma, then I would be not broken. I would be more complete. I would be better. I would be all of these things. And I might start to cry in a second. But being able to hold space with facilities that I love and being able to hold space for people is something that brings me so much joy. It allowed me to work through all of that other stuff. And having brain trauma and having had a physical experience where I wasn't in my body, I feel like allows me to really relate to people in a room. And so when students or practitioners or members or whatever come to me with something that they feel like is holding them back from being in a class, really reminds me of when I felt like that too. And that is why I feel like it is so important to share the mistakes, the nitty-gritty, the things we're uncomfortable with, which is why I am keeping that class up, because I think it would be unfair to me, even though there was a lot of work that goes into prepping. I feel like it would be sending myself the wrong message of I can't show this thing because it wasn't perfect. And how much in life do we do that? Do we feel like it's not perfect, and maybe there's a reason why you feel it's not perfect, whether it be something physically related or environmentally related or a conversation that you continually have with yourself, or that I have with myself about that. And I'm getting to a place now where I feel like the only thing I want to do is be completely and fully transparent. And knowing and trusting that with my transparency and vulnerability, that when those things come up in classes where there are brain blanks and maybe saying the wrong thing, or like sometimes when I'm really tired, I get these like little tics, and it doesn't happen that often because I really try to make sure that I take care of myself to show up. But when I'm really, really tired, I have that tick again where like the word that I want to say and the word I actually say aren't the same word. And it's really random with what it happens with. Last time it was with the color orange, and I kept trying to say, I was teaching and I was trying to name props, and I was trying to ask people to grab like a squishy ball or grab a triangle strap, and I just kept saying orange. Like the only thing that came out of my mouth was orange. And then you get flustered because then you hear the tick, and then you keep doing it. So that's something I don't know if I've ever shared publicly. So there we go, sharing that too. And so knowing that in the transparency of sharing these things, that the people who show up in exchange aren't going to care, aren't going to judge, that we can laugh it off, that we can all know that we're people, that all of the other stuff that get brought to class totally, like, I don't want to say supersede, but overvalue, I guess, the other stuff that maybe doesn't feel perfect or flawless. And I feel so much better for sharing this. So thank you for letting me do that. Thank you for letting me show up with all that I have to give in its absolutely imperfect way. And knowing that sometimes we're going to go in a bit of a roundabout to get where we want to go, but the point is to move and have fun along the way. And that I would like to continue sharing my journey and my experience. And I so want to hear about yours as well. And that it's not about one person in the room being the teacher. We are really all teachers. And that although I might be offering an imperfect blueprint, that there's so much happening outside of that blueprint that's like more important than making sure that we're practicing to perfection. I am a recovering perfectionist, which is sort of one of the gifts that having had brain trauma has given me, is that if I were to really stress myself out about things being flawless and not showing these tics that happen inside my brain, I would be exhausted. I would not have a social life. I would not have relationships. I would not be able to go outside. I would be so bored down with shame and stress and anxiety. And so getting to do what I do and then getting to share all of the things that are happening mentally behind the scenes. I'm less of a mashed potato now in my brain. I'm much more of a baked potato. Like, there's definitely more solid structures and solid lines, but every now and then it gets just a little too soft in some places and I don't know what's going on. I'm not sure if this made much sense, but I feel really good for sharing. So hopefully this is something that we can just continue chatting about and receiving. And I feel like there's a lot about brain injuries that I'm super passionate about and I want to be an advocate for, and I would like to continue moving forward with that. So thank you for being on this journey with me. If you've been to class with me, please feel free to come up and say hi. Let me know what you've listened to, what you know. Because sometimes I forget what I've shared, and so it's nice to have a check-in and be like, oh, right, that's right, I did share that. I hope you have a beautiful rest of wherever it is you are, and I hope we can move forward together knowing that being imperfect is so sensationally beautiful, because we are all imperfect. And I will continue to share my imperfections, and I'm happy to share together. Thank you so much for listening to my little tale, and I will see you somewhere else. Thank you, thank you, thank you.